Bonjour à tous. Mon nom est Pierre Aucoin et je viens de Nouvelle-Écosse. C'est avec plaisir que j'aimerais vous présenter notre conférencier Matthew Johnson. Monsieur Johnson est le directeur de l'éducation à Habilo Media. Il est l'auteur de nombreuses leçons Habilo Media, de documents à l'intention des parents et des ressources interactifs, ainsi qu'un chiffre de projets de recherche jeunesse dans le monde branché d'Habilo Media. Il a publié des blogs et des articles sur des sites web et des magazines du monde entier et a présenté des documents d'Habilo Media sur des sujets tels que le droit d'auteur, la cyberintimidation, l'image corporelle et la haine en ligne à des comités parlementaires, les conférences universitaires, des gouvernements et des organisations du monde entier comme conférencier. Donnez-lui un alciol chaleureux.
Good day, everyone. My name is Micah, and I am from Coquitlam, BC. It is my pleasure to introduce our special guest speaker, Matthew Johnson. Mr. Johnson is the Director of Education for MediaSmarts, Canada's Centre for Digital and Media Literacy. He is the author of many of MediaSmarts' lessons, parent materials, and interactive resources, and a lead on MediaSmarts' Young Canadians in a Wired World research project. He has contributed blogs and articles to websites and magazines around the world, as well as presenting MediaSmarts materials on topics such as copyright, cyberbullying, body image, and online hate to parliamentary committees, academic conferences, and governments and organizations around the world, frequently as a keynote speaker. Please give him a warm welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you all. So, good afternoon. We're going to be looking today at some easy ways that you can verify what's true and recognize what isn't true online. Now, you're going to be trying out these skills. So you are going to need some kind of internet-connected device. A phone is fine, a tablet, anyone has a laptop with you, that's fine. If you don't have something with you that you can use to connect to the internet, then just work with someone. You may have to change seats the first time we do one of those exercises. That's fine. It's okay if a couple of people are working together. The second thing I'm going to mention before we get started is that this event is being live streamed into classrooms across the country. So that means that in the points in this workshop when I ask you to contribute, just wait a moment till you have the microphone. We do have people to bring a microphone to you, and that's just to make sure that everyone across Canada and everyone here in the room can hear you. So let's start with a quick little quiz. I'm going to show you some things, and I just want you to decide for yourself, decide in your head, which you think is real. Which of these pictures do you think is real? Right. Which of these news sources do you think is real? Which of these websites is real? The Shed restaurant at Dulwich or the Mike the Headless Chicken Festival? Yeah, you guessed. I was trying to fool you there. But what that really demonstrates is that it's not easy to spot misinformation online. It's just as easy to make a fake website as a real one. And computer graphics that just a few years ago were limited to big budget Hollywood movies are now available on free smartphone apps. So that went from Hollywood to your phone in 3 years. Because everything on the internet is connected, it's easy for misinformation to reach lots of people. Sometimes people share misinformation by accident. Sometimes it's because we really think that something is true. Or maybe we think that other people won't take it seriously. Maybe we share something that we think is a joke or that we know is a joke, but other people don't realize it. Most of us have probably shared something that we thought wasn't true without checking it. We're more likely to share things that we feel strongly about. So if there is something that we really want to be true, we're more likely to share it. If there's something that we really hope isn't true, we're more likely to try to debunk it, even if it is true. But a lot of misinformation online isn't trying to get us to believe a particular thing. It's actually designed to make us doubt whether anything is true. So here's an example where the Russian troll factory actually created Facebook pages that organized rallies on both sides of a particular issue, because they didn't really care about one side or the other. They just wanted to spread doubt. They wanted to polarize the conversation. And that's why even seemingly harmless examples of misinformation matter. Because online misinformation hasn't just made us easier to fool, it's made us more cynical. And that's a really important distinction between being skeptical and being cynical. Being skeptical means asking questions. Being cynical means not believing that there is such a thing as truth, or that we could ever find out what is true. When we're cynical, if we can't tell what's true, it feels safer to assume that everything is fake. But critical thinking isn't about doubting everything. It's about learning how to find out what is true, because only truth can break the fake. So we're going to take a look at 4 fact-checking steps, 4 different ways of finding out whether something that you see online is true. Now, most of these will take you no more than a minute or 2 to do. Once you've practiced them, a lot of them will only take you 30 seconds to do. Just one of these will usually get you the answer you need, but it's good to know how to do all 4. I'll show you a few different ways to do each one, and then you'll get a chance to practice each one of them. Sometimes a single search can break the fake if a professional fact checker has already done the work for you. Thanks to computers, it's easy to make fake pictures. And a lot of times, people will share them without knowing that they're fake. Take, for example, these 2 photos. One from Picology, one from History Lovers Club, 2 popular Twitter accounts. Both of those accounts have thousands or more followers. They both look pretty real, don't they? Or do they both look fake? Both accounts have shared plenty of fake and misleading photos. Now, we could do the detective work ourselves, and I'll show you how to do that in a couple of minutes, but it's easier to let somebody else do it. So let's start with the grandparent of all fact-checking sites, Snopes.com. How many people here have heard of Snopes? Good. So Snopes has been around since the early days of the internet. It's probably the oldest fact-checking site on the internet, and they fact-check all kinds of things. They got their start fact-checking old stories about, alligators in the sewer. Now a lot of what they do has to do with politics, but they still fact-check everything. When we search Snopes, we go to the site and we search for Zeppelin over pyramid, we can see that they've already done the work for us. They've confirmed that this photo of the Zeppelin over the pyramid is for real. When we search the Snopes for pyramid clouds, we find they've also checked this photo out and found that it's fake. So in each case, we found out that photo is fake or real. Took us 15 seconds. There are fact checkers that specialize in different topics, like health, politics in different countries. Another way that you can fact check something without going directly to a fact checking site is to do a search and you add the word hoax or fake. So some of you may have seen every time there's a big flood or a big storm, there's a photo that goes around claiming to be a shark swimming around in a subway, a flooded subway. So if you see that, you'd be right to be skeptical. So you can say shark in subway station hoax, and that's going to tell you that yes, it is a hoax. Now, that technique can be a little risky because, of course, anyone can say that something is a hoax. So you want to know that the people who are debunking it or confirming it are legitimate fact checkers. So you want to make sure that they've signed on to the International Fact-Checking Network's Code of Principles. But we've actually made things even easier for you because we've made a custom search engine that searches 8 different fact checkers all at once. How many people here know what a bit.ly is? You're all familiar with bit.ly? Okay. So bit.ly is just it's what's called a link shortener, and what it means is that I don't have to put up a whole long URL for you, right? You can just do bit.ly/fact-search. That takes you to a custom Google search that searches just those 8 fact checkers. So instead of searching the entire internet, it only looks at those 8 sites. So you know that what you get is coming from a reliable source. So here's an example that we're going to take a look at, and it uses another bit.ly. So this was a story that went around, a video, maybe some of you saw it, that claims to be of Toronto Raptors fans cheering when Golden State Warriors player Kevin Durant got injured. This was seen and shared more than 1 million times on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram. So this is going to be your first live exercise. You can take a look at the video there at bit.ly/Durant injury. Use some of the skills that we were just talking about and find out whether or not this video is for real. We're going to take maybe 3 or 4 minutes to do that. Yeah, question. Just wait a sec.
Is this a soccer bar in England?
Well, we're going to do the exercise first. All right? Take a couple minutes, try out some of the skills that we just talked about, and we'll come back to that. All right, thanks. So if you don't have something that you can use to connect to the internet, find someone nearby to work with. Take 1 more minute to find out whether this is for real or not. So, what do people think? Is this real or not? Now remember that we are being live streamed, so don't just shout things out. If you think you know, first of all, only put up your hand if you can tell me why you think that, how you got an answer. So if you think you know and you can tell me how, put up your hand. All right, so why don't we start back there? We have time for 2 or 3. So just quickly, do you think it's for real or not, and why? How did you get your answer?
I think it's fake because I searched it up. I searched up the Durant injury hoax or whatever, and the first link was to like an article explaining why it's fake, and they used clues like the flags and things like that as to why it's fake.
Good.
Yeah.
All right. Anyone else? Any other opinions or any other ways of getting there? All right, up at the front.
I believe it's fake because you can notice the video shaking up and down a little bit.
Okay, so there might be some things about the video itself that might make you skeptical. Keep in mind, again, 1 million people believe this was true. Remember what I said earlier, that we're less likely to question something we really want to believe. So imagine you're a Golden State Warriors fan, or you just hate Toronto, and you see this, you're not too likely to be saying, there's something a little funny about that video, because you want it to be true. But if you're in the habit of fact-checking, then you're going to get an unambiguous answer. All right, one more. Yes, in the middle there.
So I did the custom Google search, and I typed in exactly that caption there, and then it came up, and I had 4 links, all from the sites that you had listed before, and they all said that it was fake. And it was superimposed in a British sports soccer club, yeah.
Good, exactly right. So we can see there's 2 different ways of doing it. You guys got them both. So first of all, we can put in the phrase, Kevin Durant, injury, Toronto, bar cheering, fake, or something like that. And you can see one of the top hits is things suggesting that it is fake. Or we can do that custom search those 8 fact-checking sites, and again, we go directly to articles explaining that yes, indeed, there is something funny about the video because it's actually a video of people cheering a soccer game. You noticed it looked like people were watching soccer. Good reason to be skeptical, good reason to take that extra step and fact-check it, and that they had edited in that footage. So either of those leads to this article, which shows us that the video was manipulated. But interestingly, there's nothing there on Snopes, and that's why it's good to search multiple fact-checkers, because that doesn't necessarily mean it's true. If you go to Snopes and something hasn't been confirmed or debunked, that just means they haven't gotten to it. And so when we do that, we move on to our next step, and that is check the original or find the original source. Now that's particularly important. That's probably the key skill for verifying information online. Because it's so easy to copy and share things online, it's vital to find out where things originally came from. Because if you try to verify every link in the chain that brought something to you, it's going to take a long time. So someone might have shared it to you by social media. News stories often run articles that are based on another news source. So you want to go, where did it come from originally? And then you can verify it. So an easy way to find the original source is to use a search engine. So let's imagine we see this. This is a post that suggests that Senator Mike Lee, U.S. Senator Mike Lee, was in Congress and he showed a photo of Aquaman on the Congress floor. Now, for the same reasons that we were skeptical of the last video, we could rightly be skeptical of this. It sounds silly, right? And it's super easy to change a picture where someone is holding a sign, right? It's the easiest thing in the world to do because all you have to do is change the sign. Never pose online holding a sign. It's just bad news. So, how do we find out if this is true? Well, there's an easy way. We do a search for his name, Mike Lee. We had Aquaman, and we put on C-SPAN because this apparently came, you can see there, supposedly came from C-SPAN, which is the channel that broadcasts live footage of Congress in the US. And we see that, yes, indeed, that video really did come from C-SPAN. And so we find out that, yeah, this actually did happen. Why it happened, I couldn't tell you, but it really did happen. Another way specifically of investigating a photo is to do what's called a reverse image search. So here's another sign. Here's astronomer Carl Sagan. Photo looks like it was taken in the late 1970s. He's holding a sign in that great 1970s computer font. It says, "Don't forget no billboards in space." Is this legit? Well, here's what we do. We copy image location. So hover over it, right-click or double-tap if you're using a phone, select Copy Image Location. Then we're going to go to a website called tineye.com. Now, there are a couple of different reverse image searches, but this is my favorite. And the reason why it's my favorite is because it shows you all the different versions of a photo, and you can sort it to show you the oldest one first. And so when we do that, we see that the oldest version of that photo has him holding a completely different sign. It's actually, he's holding up what was put on an illustration of what was put on the Voyager spacecraft, the first spacecraft, the first human spacecraft that we know of that ever left the solar system. Right. So we know that that other photo is fake because we've got two identical photos. This is the older one, and it looks different. But a photo doesn't have to be fake to be misleading. It can mislead us by not being what it claims to be. So this looks a lot like Charlie Chaplin posing under the Eiffel Tower sometime in the 1920s. It's actually an actress named Thelmy Talia dressed up as Charlie Chaplin. It was taken sometime in the last 10 years, and they put on a photo filter to make it look old. Now, that's not exactly a fake photo, but it's misrepresenting it, itself. That's why we need to follow links in any story until we get to where information actually came from. That's especially important on social networks, where we usually pay more attention to who shared something with us. So here we are following links, for instance. This is an article on Huffington Post, but the article isn't actually from Huffington Post. We can see that it's getting information from the New York Times. We can follow that link back to the New York Times. It doesn't matter whether we can trust Huffington Post or not, because the story really came from the New York Times. And down here, they're quoting someone. This is Chief Executive Tony Xu of DoorDash, and they say he said this on Twitter. We can actually follow the link to make sure, yeah, he really did say that. Now, it matters on social networks in particular because we tend to pay more attention to who shared something with us than where it actually came from. And you can see that the way social networks are set up actually encourages that. The sharer is a lot more prominent than the original source, but we have to ignore that. We have to pay more attention to the original source. Now, if there aren't links given, then we look for phrases like this: the New York Times has reported, or the word source at the bottom of a story. So here is another Huffington Post story, but again, they're just running something from Reuters, which is a news agency. So again, we may not trust Huffington Post, or maybe we do, but it doesn't matter. It's not a plus or a minus because it's not actually a Huffington Post story. It's a Reuters story. And Reuters we can trust. Here's a good example. This story is from Bleacher Report, and it claims that breakdancing and skateboarding are going to become official Olympic events. But when we scroll down a bit, we see that it's actually based on earlier stories from Associated Press and Reuters, which are both reliable sources. So it doesn't matter that we've never heard of Bleacher Report, because they're reporting something that's coming from a reliable source. We want to make sure that they are giving us an accurate picture, though. We want to make sure that what they're telling us is really what the Associated Press and Reuters said, so we can follow those links. We go to the Reuters website, we go to the story, and we see that, yes, indeed, breakdancing is going to be an official Olympic sport come 2024. But it's also important to make sure that the story really is from that source, because a lot of websites, even legitimate websites, carry what's called sponsored content. So here is that same Reuters story, but you can see that at the top and down the right are a whole bunch of other stories that aren't from Reuters. Those are actually ads. People pay to put those on the Reuters site. So again, you don't want to be tricked into thinking that those are Reuters stories. So recognizing sponsored content is really important in determining whether you're on the original site. We can also do a search for the topic plus the sources that were given. So let's say it claimed it was a Reuters story, but there were no links back. So we want to know, is there really a story at Reuters about breakdancing being an Olympic event? So we simply do breakdancing Olympics Reuters, and there we get the same story. We can also use reverse image search. Remember, we used it to see if a photo was legitimate. We can also use it to find out if a photo is being presented in the right context. So some of you may have seen a photo like this circulating after the climate strike a couple weeks ago. Anybody here go to the climate strike? Yeah. So some of you may have seen similar photos. They wouldn't have been this one because you can tell those are English police officers. But there were similar photos going around, people trying to claim that the people at the climate strike had left a big mess. So, and that's what this one is saying. It's talking about the aftermath of an environmental protest in England. But if we use reverse image search, we find out that in fact, even though the photo is real, it's a photo of the day after a rock concert, an outdoor rock concert. So something doesn't have to be fake to be misleading, and reverse image search and finding the source in general is a really important way of finding out not just whether something is real, but also whether it's telling you the right story. So now it's your turn. Did explorers really find hundreds of animals that were thought to be extinct at a place called the Lost City of the Monkey God? Take a couple minutes, find the original source of this story, and see if it's true or not. All right, and take one more minute if you haven't finished. All right, so what do people think? Is this story for real? Can we verify it? And how do we know? Yeah, right there. Just hang on a sec.
Because it said it was from CNN, and then I checked it is real because I checked the CNN website, and the same article was there, a similar article.
Okay, so where did it say it was from CNN?
On the article.
So on the article that's linked to there?
Yes.
All right, good. So you were able to track it back to the original source? Yes. Just wait a sec for the mic. I'm giving you a workout.
We found this one to be misleading because at most they'd found 22 extinct or species they hadn't discovered before, and some of them were only saying 3, whereas this one's saying hundreds.
Okay, so there's the question of context. Is it giving you the accurate context? So you could read this in this headline in a couple of different ways because it says hundreds of extinct creatures. So the question then, is it hundreds of extinct species, or is it a smaller number of extinct species but hundreds of individual animals? So yeah, you could, when we go to the original source, we find that while this is true, it might be a little bit misleading. But this is a pretty easy one to verify because even though we have no reason to trust allthat'sinteresting.com, if we scroll down, we see a link to The Independent. And so this story isn't really from All That's Interesting, it's from The Independent, which is a well-known British newspaper. And so we know that it's fundamentally true. And if we go to that article in The Independent, we will note what you noted, which is that the original story is a little bit misleading. But what if we don't know that The Independent is a reliable source? What if you've never heard of The Independent before? After all, there are hundreds of newspapers and news sites and TV news channels around the world, and you can't be expected to know them all. There are ones just here in Canada that I've never heard of. And how do we know that this is the real website of The Independent? Well, that's when we get to our third step, verify the source. Now, this is the only time when it matters what order you do the steps in. There's no point in verifying a source until you're sure that you're at the original source. So if we'd verified All That's Interesting, that would have been a waste of time because that wasn't the original source. It's only when we track it to the original source, when we track it to The Independent, that it's worth doing this. So how do we do that? Basically, verifying a source means asking 3 questions about it. First of all, does that source really exist? Remember, it's super easy to create fake websites, even fake newspapers online. Secondly, are they who they say they are? It's also extremely easy to impersonate people or organizations online. And finally, and this is the trickiest one, but usually you can do it pretty quickly, are they reliable? Are they trustworthy? So let's start with, are they real? It's important not to be fooled by what a website looks like, because Anyone can make a really slick-looking website these days, and in many cases, trustworthy sources have websites that don't look as professional because they don't put that much effort into them. So a university website or a website for a government agency won't necessarily have a nice-looking website. So this is, as you can see in the flashing text, this is the actual website of the Yale School of Art, and it looks like it was done in 1995 and hasn't been updated since then. People who spread misinformation online often invent local newspapers or TV stations. This kind of source seems trustworthy, but most of us aren't likely to have heard of a paper or TV station in a different country or even a different city. So if you see something from the Courier Mail, you have probably no way of knowing whether that's even a real newspaper. It is. It's an Australian newspaper. By all accounts, not a particularly good one, but it is a real newspaper. So we're going to look at two different websites that both claim to be news sources from Sherbrooke, Quebec. The Sherbrooke Times and the Sherbrooke Record. One of them is real and one of them isn't. So both of them have an About Us or a Contact Us page with lots of information, who works there, how you can reach them, and so on. But that stuff is easy to fake. So we're going to go to a source that they can't control. We're going to go to Wikipedia. We're going to look up Sherbrooke Record. You don't actually have to go to Wikipedia to search Wikipedia, by the way. You can go to Google and put in Sherbrooke Record Wikipedia or whatever you want, Wikipedia, and it'll search it for you. So from the Wikipedia article, we can see the record has been around for more than a century, and there's no reason to think that it's not a reliable source. We can see, certainly, that it does exist. Now, Wikipedia, as most of you know, can be edited by any user. Most of the time, what are called malicious edits are reverted quickly. There are lots of editors working to keep Wikipedia reliable, and there are also automatic editors that will revert edits that seem to be malicious. But you can check, because every Wikipedia article has a talk page and a history page. So if you wanted to know, hey, this looks convincing, but could this have just been created like in the last year to pretend that this newspaper has been around forever? Checking either the talk or the view history page can both show you that this has actually been, this article about the Sherbrooke Record has been around for more than 10 years. So if it were a con, it's a very long con. How about the Sherbrooke Times? Well, there's nothing about the Sherbrooke Times in Wikipedia, but that doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't exist. After all, Wikipedia is made by volunteers, and they don't get around to everything. You will find that in particular with Canadian topics. Just like Snopes doesn't always cover things that happen in Canada, Wikipedia doesn't either necessarily. So we can go just to Google, look up the Sherbrooke Times. Here's our first three hits are the website itself and its Twitter feed. The fourth hit, an article about how it's a fake news site. So just searching, just going to Google and searching up Sherbrooke Times tells us this is not a real newspaper. It's also easy to pretend to be someone else online. So once you know that a source really exists, you need to find out if what you're looking at really came from them. Did Toronto police really put out a warning that someone in a Spider-Man costume was blocking traffic by throwing webbing on streetcar lines? Well, some social networks like Twitter or Instagram verify users by putting a check mark next to their name. Now, it's important to understand that check mark does not necessarily mean they're a reliable source. It only means that they are who they say they are. But in this case, the check mark tells us this is a real Toronto police account, and that means that this story is true. It's a bit harder to make sure that you're on the right website. People have made fake versions of real news websites like The Guardian and the CBC that look almost exactly like the real thing. Both of those are screenshots of fake websites, and they look exactly like the real thing. But there are things that are harder to fake. A web address by itself doesn't tell you much. It's not true that a .org web address is more trustworthy. Anyone can get a .org web address. But you do want to confirm that the web address matches the official website. So if you're looking at something that claims to be the UNESCO website, you want to make sure that when you Google UNESCO, the websites match, the web addresses match. If you're looking at something that claims to be CBC, if it doesn't have cbc.ca in the web address, you know it's probably not the real thing, or at least you need to investigate a little more. So if we're satisfied that a source is real and it is who they say they are, now we want to find out if they're trustworthy. For sources of general information like newspapers, that means making sure they have a process for getting good information and a good track record of doing it. This becomes especially important when you're looking at sources that aren't fake but may only give you part of the story or may not have high standards in making sure what they post is accurate. Now, even reliable news sources sometimes make mistakes, but if you see a story from a source that you know is reliable, you can assume it's probably true. So let's look at another pair of newspapers, the Washington Times and the Washington Post. Now, both of these are real newspapers, and neither one is entirely unreliable, but one is significantly more reliable than the other. So there are signs that we can look at to decide how reliable a news source is. How often do they make mistakes? And if they do make mistakes, do they admit to them and correct them? Are they willing to publish things that their owners or their readers wouldn't agree with? If we look up the Washington Post on Wikipedia, we see it's been around since 1877, and it's won 47 Pulitzer Prizes for journalism. Now, the Post isn't perfect. They've published a few things that turned out to be inaccurate, but every time they did, they published corrections openly. So we know that they're going with a pretty good track record. Now, the Times has also been around for a while, since 1982, but their track record isn't as good. Most of the Wikipedia article about them is about times that they've spread misinformation about everything from the ozone layer to secondhand smoke. Now, that doesn't mean that the Times is an entirely unreliable source, or that the Post is entirely reliable, but it does mean that most of the time you're going to do a lot better trusting the Post. For more specialized sources, you want to ask whether they're experts or authorities in that topic. Being an expert is more than just being a doctor or a scientist. You have to make sure they're an expert in the right field. So here we see Dr. Jack, who is a cardiologist, and you would be right in asking, why should I care what a cardiologist who treats heart problems thinks about the flu shot? A cardiologist really has no more expert opinion, no more expertise, no more authority when it comes to vaccines than any other person. Now, some sources, like certain professional groups or government agencies, are recognized authorities on particular topics. But remember that anyone can call themselves a university on the internet. So this is Prager University, and when you go down to the bottom of their website, you see Prager University is not an accredited academic institution and does not offer certifications or diplomas. So what does Prager University do? Well, they post videos on YouTube. So Prager University, not really a university, not an authority. Similarly, anyone can call themselves an institute, even if they have a long record of false claims. Here's an example. This news story was actually on the website of a Canadian newspaper, and it claims, it says that it's based on a new study by an organization called Skyscanner. It quotes Alex Astaniev, who they say is a travel industry expert at Skyscanner, and the findings of this new study are that when you're booking travel, you should go through a travel website instead of booking directly through the airline. So, let's look up Skyscanner, and we find that Skyscanner actually is a travel website. So they have a certain vested interest in wanting us to book with travel websites. And Alex Astaniev, their travel industry expert, is actually their product manager. Now, most of that information is from a LinkedIn page. We know how easy that is to fake, so we do a little bit of extra research. We see if Alex Astaniev is mentioned anywhere on the Skyscanner website, and indeed, there he is. So now we know Skyscanner is not an authority, Alex Astaniev is not an expert, and that study that led to that article in the newspaper was basically just them trying to sell their services. So, you're going to give it a try. Take a look at two similar-looking groups, the American Academy of Pediatrics and the American College of Pediatricians. Both of them claim to represent American pediatricians. Which one are we more likely to trust? Take a couple minutes. Take one more minute. So, what do people think? Which one is more reliable, and how do we know? All right, I see a hand up high right at the front, so we'll start with you.
The American Academy of Pediatrics is more reliable because when I searched it up and I used the link that you gave us, it gave the same link and it showed the safe lock.
Okay.
And when I looked up the other one on Wikipedia, it said it was a hate group spreading anti-LGBT junk.
Okay, so the little lock in the web address, that's really useful for when you're doing something like banking or shopping because it shows you that something is a secure website. It doesn't necessarily tell you whether something is reliable, but definitely checking Wikipedia, finding out what other people think generally about these organizations gives us some valuable information. Yes?
So we looked up both of them on Wikipedia, and the one on the right is for adults and the one on the left is for children. So the one for children is probably better. Like, even though the one on the right claims on that site to be for children, on Wikipedia it says it's for adults. So we trust the one on the left more.
All right. So they both claim to be. You can see it's the College of Pediatricians. It they both claim to represent American pediatricians, but obviously that's going to make us feel we trust them less. And yes, when we just look when we just look them up on Google, we can see the first hit is the Wikipedia page. And we can see that the American Academy of Pediatrics has 64,000 members, whereas the American College of Pediatricians has just 500 members. So obviously, the first one, the AAP, has a stronger claim to represent American pediatricians because it represents many, many, many more of them. But when we go to the Wikipedia page, when we go into a little bit more depth, as you pointed out, we see that the ACP also has a particular bias. The reason they split off from the AAP is because they were pediatricians who were opposed to, specifically to letting gays and lesbians adopt children. So we see that it's not just unreliable because it's not an authority, it also has a bias. Just like Skyscanner, who had a bias towards getting you to give them money, they have a bias towards a particular position. But it's important not to mix up authority and bias. An expert will probably have stronger opinions than on a topic than someone who isn't an expert on that topic, but they'll be better informed opinions too. When we compare the AAP and the ACP, we see that the AAP has opinions on a wide range of things, everything from car seats to when the school day should start, and that those opinions are based on the expertise of their members, all 64,000 members. Whereas the positions that the ACP takes are all based on their beliefs about sexuality. Now we'll go on to our last step, and that is check other sources. Now this may sometimes be the last one you do because it's a useful one when the other three haven't given you anything. But it can also often be the first one because it's a really good way of finding out whether or not something really happened. So here's an example where I would go to this step first. Did a politician in Pakistan really do an entire news conference with the cat face filter left on? Well, if I go search it up and I click on the News tab in Google, not the All tab, click on the News tab, we see that yes, indeed, it really did happen. And there's a reason to use the News tab because it's more curated. So when you're in the All tab, it's going to show you everything, including sources that aren't reliable. But the News tab is curated. When you use the News tab, it only shows you news sources that really exist. Not all of them are equally trustworthy, but they all really exist. Now this step is also important for getting context, making sure that you get the whole story. Because remember, even legitimate sources make mistakes, and every source brings its own viewpoint or bias to a story. So using this step is a good way of washing out the potential bias in any one source because you can search a whole bunch of newspapers all at once. We can also use this step to find out whether something fits with what the experts on the topic agree with, what's called the consensus view. So in fields like medicine, science, and history, the consensus has been built up over time, with each new piece of evidence tilting the scales in its favor. Now, something that goes against the consensus may turn out to be right, but it takes more and better evidence to outweigh the consensus. So people once believed that the Earth was static, that the continents always looked the way they do now. It was very controversial, the idea of tectonic plates and continental drift, that the plates of the Earth are moving around. But eventually, enough evidence was produced, enough scientific evidence was produced, that became the new consensus. Now, while it's generally good to give both sides of a story, including views that experts agree aren't right, can actually spread misinformation. So an article on the pyramids doesn't need to include the fact that some people think that they were built by aliens. Now, news sources and Wikipedia aren't always the best place to look for consensus when it comes to things like science and medicine, because the people writing those articles often aren't experts. For those topics, you want to turn to sources that you already know are authorities. So we might see this video on YouTube that claims that the North Pole is shifting. We've created another custom search, and this searches 8 different reliable science sources, everything from Scientific American to Canadian Geographic to Science Magazine. And if we do that, we find that, well, not everything in that video is exactly right. Basically, it's true. The North Pole is shifting. So now you're going to take a look at our last step. You're going to take a look at this article that claims that something called a solar minimum is going to create a mini ice age. Using our last step, check other sources, take 2 minutes to find out if that's true. At this point, you can probably do it in 1 minute, but I'm going to give you 2. And take 1 more minute. You're done. So is this article reliable? Does this reflect the consensus? How do we know? All right, we heard from you a minute ago, so I'm going to let someone else have a chance. Anybody else? All right, go ahead.
So I used bit.ly /science search, and it gave me Science Daily, and it's a little bit of misinformation because it said solar activity predicted to fall 60% in the 2030s.
Okay, so first of all, it's not going to happen anytime soon. We found that out. Anything else? Yes, just a sec.
I searched mini ice age coming 2020, and all of the articles said that it was debunked.
Okay, good. And when you searched it, were you searching with that custom tool or with regular Google? Okay, that's good. So using one of our other tools there, good, or one of our other steps. Anybody else? So here's the story. So if we do a search for solar minimum ice age in the news tab, we see that the only legitimate site that's reporting on it is that site where we found it, the Express. So when only one source is reporting something, odds are good it's not a real story. Now sometimes one source will get a scoop, will report a story before everybody else, but generally speaking, if nobody else has picked up this story, it's probably not for real. We can also go to Wikipedia and do a search for Ice Age. So if you're on a website, this is a little easier on a browser, like on a laptop. On a website, you can do Control F or Command F on a Mac, and you can do a search within that website. That's very useful because you don't want to have to read that whole article on solar minimum. We can just go to solar minimum, the website on solar minimum, search for Ice Age, and you can see by the fact that that's red, there's no mention of Ice Age anywhere in the article. So that, again, tells us the solar minimum is real, but it's not going to cause an ice age. And finally, we can go to our custom search up solar minimum ice age, and one of the very top hits is New Scientist saying, yes, the solar minimum is real, but it's not going to cause an ice age. It's going to reduce temperatures in the upper atmosphere. It's not going to have any effect down here on Earth. So now you've learned all 4 steps. Use fact-checking tools, find the original source, verify the source, and check other sources. So now, I'm going to give you 2 minutes, 1 minute each, to check these two stories. Have people really found rice that was actually plastic? Are Instagram stars actually posing in front of a toxic waste dump? Take 2 minutes and find out. And take 1 more minute. You're all pros now, so it shouldn't take you more than 1 minute apiece. So for each of these stories, there were a couple of different ways you could verify it, but in each case there was a quickest way. So let's take a look at the first one. Is it true that people have found rice that was actually plastic? If you think you know and you can tell me how you know, you can put up your hand. All right, over here.
I think that the plastic rice is fake because after doing a news search for plastic and rice, there might have been 1 or 2 news articles that said yes, but after taking that to Snopes, it was debunked.
Okay, so we saw it, not many stories about it when you did the news search, and Snopes had debunked it. Okay, yes.
Oh, oops. For the second one,
Well, we're still on the first one. Okay. Anyone else with the first one? Yeah, so the first one, pretty easy, and this is an example. Yeah, we can check the news search. There's a lot of different ways to do it, but the quickest way in this case is just go to Snopes. This is the kind of thing that Snopes specializes in, and yes, indeed, it is false. All right, how about our second story, the toxic waste lake?
So the second one, I dug into it. Then I found a post from the company that threw all the waste into the lake, and they said that they don't want anyone going to the lake to swim in it, so it's real.
Okay, so that's some pretty good corroborating evidence. That's a good example of checking other sources. That may not have been the fastest way. Okay, I see a hand up back there. So that was good detective work, but there may have been a quicker way to do it.
I just went, and what I did was I looked up the link, and with the post on Twitter, it actually had another link to the website. So I went to that website, and it gave another link for where it got its source, and it got its source from the New York Times,
Good.
which is a site that I trust. So I was like, oh, cool. And it had nowhere else on the New York Times. It had no other site that it got it from. That's where it was from.
Good. So in this case, the quickest way to verify it was to find the original source. So here we see where we get when we follow it. There's a link to New York Times, and that leads to this article. So we know if it's in the New York Times, it's probably true. Particularly, the New York Times is unlikely to lie to you about a toxic waste lake in Siberia. Now, is this the real New York Times website? We can take a moment and take a look. And indeed, it's got www.nytimes.com. A quick Google check will show us that's the real website. So in both of those cases, now that you've learned these steps, we were able to verify these two stories in just a minute. Some of you did some pretty extensive detective work in that 1 minute. And it shows you just how easy it can be. That most of the time, these 4 steps aren't going to take you more than a minute or even more than 30 seconds. And that's important because we have a responsibility. Today, thanks to social media, we're not just consumers of news and information. We're broadcasters too. When we share things, we can be part of the problem or part of the solution. And so we need to do these steps. We need to double check every single time before we share something, because only you can break the fake. Thank you very much. All right, and thank you very much to people who are streaming this across the country. We don't have time for a full Q&A, but if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to hang around into your break. Come up and talk to me. I'm glad to answer them. Thank you all so much.
Au nom de tous les participants des rencontres du Canada, j'aimerais vous remercier d'être venus nous rencontrer aujourd'hui.
On behalf of my fellow participants, I would like to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to come join us today.
All right, guys, you've got a break for about 15 minutes, so you can get up, stretch your legs. Vous pouvez aller vous dégourdir pendant environ 15 minutes. Leave your chairs, laissez vos chaises.